Our first speaker is Captain Jane Kreis. She is a pharmacy officer in the U.S. Public Health Service and currently the Regional Training Officer for the Pacific region of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Her degrees include a Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy with a chemistry minor and a Master of Business Administration with a healthcare management emphasis. As a clinical pharmacist, she was involved with the initial Gusto trials while working at Good Samaritan Hospital in Dayton, Ohio. She served as a clinical pharmacist and staff development training officer at the Phoenix Indian Medical Center for Indian Health Service. Prior to her current position, Captain Kreis served as a drug manufacturing and clinical research investigator for the Seattle District Office of the U.S. FDA. She continues to conduct clinical research investigations for the FDA, both domestically and internationally. Her current work involves coordination and implementation of training required for Pacific region associated with FDA-regulated products and is the lead basic life support instructor for the Pacific region. She has done details in the Pacific region as both Acting Supervisory Consumer Safety Officer and Acting District Director for San Francisco District, as well as Acting District Director of Cincinnati District and Acting Quality Manager for Division of Human Resource Development. Her public health service assignments have included emergency response efforts for hurricanes and wildfires in the role of a clinical pharmacist, administration, finance, and planning chief. She is currently the commander for Region 9 Region Incident Support Team. Please help me in welcoming Captain Jane Kreis.
Can you guys hear me okay? All right. I'm going to walk around a little bit. Please stop me at any point with any questions. We will do questions at the end as well, but you can definitely interrupt me during the presentations. Our normal disclaimer, this is, the regulations still should be read in full. We're going to try to understand the regulations which involve clinical investigators and clinical investigator responsibilities, how FDA prepares for a clinical investigator inspection, and understand what to expect during an inspection, identify specific problems during recent inspections. How many here have been inspected by FDA? Fair amount of you, okay. So obviously, careful inspection planning is the key to getting complete information concerning clinical trial conduct. Dr. Frances Kelsey was the lead with this with President Kennedy. Obviously, she was the lady that stopped thalidomide being manufactured in the U.S. and resulted in the Kiefer-Haver Amendment in the FDNC Act. So what is bioresearch monitoring? The agency determines bioresearch monitoring is on-site inspections by the Office of Regulatory Affairs to protect data, subject protection, data verification, and compliance. The compliance manual is here. When you get inspected, you're inspected by either the local FDA inspectors, out of the local offices in your area, or maybe the headquarters office out of the assigning center, Center for Biologics or Center for Drugs, or if it's a device, Center for Devices. Tobacco, a Center for Tobacco is getting involved with that as well. Here's all the regulations, more than you want to know, but you all need to know this. I'm amazed when you go on site. Our website, www.fda.gov, is very user-friendly now. It's very transparent. It has a lot of information out there. All the CFRs are listed there for you guys free of charge. You don't need to buy a CFR book. All the compliance programs are there listed for you. The GCP guidance is available there for you in a PDF form. So what's the difference between regulation and guidance? Regulation is what's in the law. Guidance, you will never, hopefully you will never have an investigator cite you on a deviation based on the guidance document. It should be referred back to a regulation. I think we've gotten pretty good with that. The investigators should be doing daily closeout meetings, so there should be no surprises. When I came to the agency in 2002 as what they called a counterterrorism hire, there was still a lot of the old school out there that FDA was the big bad regulators, going into beating everybody up, exiting without giving anybody fair warning why they were getting a list of observations. That culture mentality has changed greatly. We've become a very transparent agency. Our warning letters, all the actions out there against clinical investigators, against food manufacturers and device manufacturers are available and open to the public. So what is a clinical investigation? Obviously by the 21 CFR, it's an experiment which a drug is administered to human subjects. An experiment is any use of drug except for the use of marketed drug in the course of medical practice. Clinical investigators defined by the regulations as an individual who conducts the clinical investigation. The clinical investigator responsibilities are responsible for the overall conduct of the study site, including directing and administrator the testing of the test article, ensuring the data are collected and maintained in accordance with the protocol and regulatory requirements. They're to follow the protocol and investigational plan. One thing I found in a lot of the inspections I've done, very good docs out there want to help the patient. We understand that. That's the practice of medicine. Once they sign that 1572 that says they shall follow that protocol, they need to follow that protocol. Or don't sign that they're going to do an investigational study. That's your guys' responsibility as sponsors, monitors for the clinical trials, the nurses, anybody involved, make sure the doc does that. Very nice lady that I met down in Oregon, asthma study. This drug was really helping her asthma patients. They did not meet the inclusion-exclusion criteria, but she enrolled them all anyways. Very nice of her to do that, but kind of violated the protocol. So we needed to lift operations for her. Obviously, she quit doing clinical research. There's a lot of incentives out there from the sponsors for these guys to do it. These guys, especially in the cancer arena, are SMEs in their areas. Very good opportunity, but they need to make sure they understand and agree with the protocol. If they don't, go back to the sponsor. Yes? Oh, somebody have a question? Go back to the sponsor and say, we don't agree with this inclusion-exclusion criteria. You guys should be proactively involved with the sponsor in these clinical protocols. When we as investigators go out to inspect the site, we're just looking at the protocol. We don't evaluate the protocol in any means. We're just verifying that what was done was done. It's kind of amazing that some of these protocols get approved. Or I looked at a pediatric renal study where they were doing was blood pressure testing. They only tested the blood pressure of the child at the beginning of the study and the end of the study. Nowhere in between. Come on. So when you guys are looking at these protocols and want to do these studies to help subjects, we appreciate that, but make sure it makes good medical sense. In the non-clinical world, the preclinical trials, we had a firm here actually in the area that denied a preclinical trial because they wanted to kill and resuscitate a pig 3 times. It made no sense. So just a friendly warning, look at the protocol. Obviously, you guys are not involved in always writing the protocol, but if you have any influence, go back to the sponsor and say, hey, this doesn't make sense. Is there any way we could change it? Or if you start the protocol and things are not following where you thought they would fall, do a protocol amendment. Obviously, maintain adequate and accurate records. Joint Commission is probably looking at you guys as much as FDA is, so make sure everything's documented. There's no over-documentation. Administer test article, adverse event reporting. My experience with the CIs in reporting adverse events do a very good job. The sponsors, on the other hand, the disconnect from what is submitted to the agency and what the sponsor submits sometimes is a little bit there. You're going, why is it? Well, the sponsor's attitude is, we didn't think it was an adverse event. You don't know that. If the doctor was prudent enough to say, Jane Doe had a headache, may or may not be related to the drug or device. We don't know. But the doctor was prudent enough to record it, so the agency should be aware of it as well. Investigator agreement. Financial disclosures become a big issue out there. Make sure these CIs do not have conflict of interest with the company that's sponsoring the trial. That's been a big thing. There's been some indictments over this, so make sure that they're following what they need to do. Sponsor investigator is huge. They also initiate it as well as conduct. So everything needs to follow, the regulations all need to be followed. They need to make sure that they're doing everything that they are supposed to as a sponsor as far as reporting, getting IRB, certification, etc. But they also still have to maintain it as a clinical investigator, so they have a dual role. This gets tricky, and this is a lot, I believe more so in the oncology studies. A lot of the university settings have a lot of sponsor investigators. So a lot of background information. Any questions at this point? So you get called for an FDA inspection. What happens? We're going to look at the science and we're going to compare it to the regulations. Who conducts these inspections? This is a map of how we're currently set up right now. We're 5 regions. We're Office of Regulatory Affairs. We're the field force that does the inspections. And we're inspecting 25% of the gross national product. So we're not just looking at clinical trials. We're looking at food manufacturers, device manufacturers, now tobacco manufacturers, egg farms. We don't look at chickens, but we look at eggs. So the folks located in these areas currently are conducting the inspections. If you're located here in the San Francisco area, you'll have somebody from the San Francisco district office do your inspection. We are in a transition phase right now, going down program lines. So hopefully you'll have more expertise coming down for the clinical research inspections. The people that have the background, they're routinely doing them. They're not just doing food inspections in addition to bioresearch monitoring, because we have some of that crossover. We're trying to get more focused, more expertise for you guys. So how does FDA choose the studies we want to do? The study assignments come from the centers. So how do the centers decide what they want to choose? They prioritize by, is one site driving the results? Is there safety issues? Is there an imbalance or an outlier? Clinical investigator history. There's a lot of places that just do clinical trials. They come top on the radar for inspections because they're doing a lot of different trials. Is there regional country diversity? I looked at a study in Argentina because there was a higher death rate, mortality rate on that product in Argentina than there was in the US. Part of it was patient care issues. The patient wasn't going until they were stage 4 for the drug, where they were going stage 2 or 3 in the US. A lot of that plays into it. Obviously, complaints. Historically, we look at phase 3 and phase 4 studies. Phase 1 and 2, maybe, if there's a complaint, or if it's a high-risk entity. You're going to see a lot more. There's a lot of biosimilars out there, so you're going to see a lot more inspections, I think, in the clinical trial world than we've done in a while. So what types of inspections are there? We talked about it. Routine. It's a new drug application. It's a pre-market application. It's a surveillance. Something's off. Directed. These are problems that have been identified. They've been reported. There's a lot of MedWatch reports on it, a lot of VAERS reports on it. Somebody's complained about the investigator or the clinical site. Or it's compliance follow-up from previous deficiencies. What the agency has done, and it's evolved since I've started with them, if you do get a list of observations, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but if they classify it, and we'll talk about classifications here, if it's classified OAI, our responsibility as a regulatory agency, our policy now is to follow up within 6 months to see if that investigator has corrected their problems, are they taking care of patients better, what's going on. For cause investigation, lack of oversight, not following protocol, inadequate monitoring, allegations of falsification, especially challenge inspections. Falsification is huge. We're finding people are making up names. They have the same labs, but it's 20 different names, like same exact labs, seriously. We actually had somebody give false respiratory data, respiratory breathing apparatus, it was the same breathing strip for 10 patients. So be careful. You guys as monitors out there, you guys make sure, obviously we wanted to protect the public health. We want to put patient safety as number one. We want to make sure that the data that is submitted to the agency for approval or additional adjuncts for that product is really true data. So what does the inspection scope look at? We look at the rights, the safety, and welfare of the research subjects. Were their quality, reliability, and integrity data ensured? Were all the unanticipated and anticipated events reported? Test article accountability records, study monitoring. Most of the time we do 100% informed consent review. Not always, but that could be cumbersome if there's 200 plus patients in the study. But we try to do as much informed consent review as possible. So what happens? FDA calls you and says, we're going to inspect you. When's a good time for you? We really, unless it's a for-cause inspection and we really need to be there, we're going to call you and say, when's the best time for an investigator to come to look at their study records? The study may be closed, it may be ongoing. We kind of like to do both. And the investigator should not be just sitting in a room reviewing records. They should be asking questions of the staff. How do you handle the patients? How do you handle the drug or the device when it comes in, the test article when it comes in? How are they dealing with patients on a database? They're going to be observing everything, so they should not be just sitting in a room reviewing records. If they are, they're not doing their job correctly. So the FDA investigator calls you guys and says, when's a good time for it? They'll schedule the inspection. We show on site, we show our credentials to prove that we are FDA, that's who we are. You cannot make a copy of them. We can show them to you. Everybody should get a business card. And we show them to the most responsible person. In the case of a clinical trial, it's the clinical investigator. If that person is not there, the notice of inspection goes to the most responsible person at the site that day. The clinical investigator can, if they're traveling on doing speeches somewhere, but are going to come back during that time, then you can either reissue another notice of inspection or at least show the clinical investigator credentials to prove that we are FDA. So then issue the 482 form, if you guys have seen one, if you've had inspection. This explains our regulatory authority, why we're there, and what records and documents need to be reviewed. When we pre-announce, they'll tell you the study they want to look at. They'll ask for every record, your IRB approvals, everything, sponsor, anything submitted to the sponsor, protocol amendments, records, patient subject records, everything will be asked for up front, so there should be no surprises. If you can have that all available before FDA walks in, that's great. That's actually very helpful. It may or may not be able to happen depending on what kind of time frame is when they want to start the inspection. But be prepared. So understand what study they're looking for. They'll tell you what records they need and how much time they'll need with the other CI and study staff. If it's just one CI and one person, they'll take as much time as they need. If you have a whole bunch of staff involved in the study, they'll probably coordinate to make sure that the people involved, they can interview them throughout the inspection. So make sure everybody's available. We realize that some of these studies, there's a lot of turnover within the industry, so some of the study monitors, some of the people involved in the study may have left. That's fine. We'll get as much information as we can. We're looking for regulatory records, case report forms, monitoring records, test article accountability records. Any source records, clinical charts, hospital records, x-ray records, subject diaries, anything. A lot of this has been historically paper. We understand now in the age of electronics, it may be electronic. We as investigators cannot access your guys' computer. You need to show us. So if everything's electronic, you need to have a mechanism to show us electronically what you captured. Caution. I ran into this with a study. The protocol said everything shall be recorded on an electronic case report form. What they put on the electronic case report form did not actually match the hard copy case report forms that were in the protocol. So be careful. Make sure, once again, read the protocol. Make sure that everything the protocol is requiring you could actually physically do. And the other thing is be careful with electronic records, East Coast, West Coast, time date stamps. They were actually recording blood pressure times at 10 a.m. East Coast time, but it was actually recording it, or West Coast time, and it was recording as 1 p.m. East Coast time. So make sure that that data is correct. It's simple things like that. Be sure that the CI and the clinical staff are available. Reserve a place for the FDA investigator to work. I've worked in patient rooms because that's the only place they've been to put us. So just make sure the room is clean and they have a spot thing. The other thing is have somebody available to make copies. The FDA investigator will gladly make copies for themselves, but it's helpful to have somebody there to make copies for them. Or if you have electronic records, what FDA will do, we'll bring our own CD-ROMs that are virus scanned, give it to you guys to copy the data, we'll virus scan it and check it, and that'll be submitted with our report. So that's perfectly fine as well. Provide specific and clear directions to your sites. Sometimes you guys are in the middle of hallways or down in the basement like the pharmacies are, down by the morgue, or some other obscure places, just so we know where to find you. Sometimes it's good to have somebody, if you need to sign in, there's a sign in at security, it's good to have somebody meet the FDA investigator at the security site so they know where to go. And we expect that. We expect to be followed to the bathroom. So no worries. So some tips for successful study. Select qualified study personnel. There's a lot of training out there, a lot of training on FDA.gov. SOCRA, you guys are partnering with SOCRA for stuff. There's a lot of training. You guys are coming, it sounds like you're doing training with the SWOG. So make sure you have qualified people. Training and experience. Provide adequate training up front. If you guys do electronic records, don't forget your IT folks. Your IT folks need to understand the regulations. They need to understand why it has to be a secure system because it's data integrity issues. Make sure they understand GCP as well. I think IT's forgot about a lot, but they're an important part of the piece. Stress importance of informed consent process. Obviously, nothing should happen unless that subject has signed the informed consent. Obtain feedback on protocol requirements. Adopt a quality system approach to your study. You guys, the compliance program is a nice, really nice way to audit yourself. That's every question in that compliance program that the FDA investigator asks. you guys could do internally. The monitors coming out to the sites probably are doing something similar. Not always, but it's a guide there. It's free of charge. You guys can create your own little quality system to do it. And it doesn't cost you anything. Ensure that adequate monitoring in the study. Perform routine audits. Ensure your current documentation is used. Provide clinical data for accuracy. Look for unreported, unanticipated events. Ensure current documentation is used. This is huge with the informed consent, especially in the SWOG studies. The informed consent probably literally changes every other month because of addition of adverse effects. Make sure that approved protocol, informed consent has been signed by the subject each time, especially if there's safety issues that have been added to it. The initial requirement is the informed consent started before the study. Obviously, if there's changes to the study, it's prudent for you to have the subject sign the new informed consent each time that's changed. That may not be realistic, and we understand that, but make sure that they're using, if you're rolling a new subject and then a new informed consent form has come through, make sure they're signing the correct version. That's been happening with electronic records because everybody relies on electronic systems and, oh, this is up to date. It may not be if somebody has not uploaded it. And if you're waiting for the IRB to send it to you electronically, you may have to have a fallback hard copy system to say this is the most current one, a tracking system, so you know that they are signing the correct informed consent. That's happening more often than not. File deviation reports for protocol regulatory violations. The note from home to enroll a subject, there's no waivers anymore for these protocols. If they don't meet inclusion and exclusion criteria, they should not be enrolled. If the sponsor says, oh, well, it's okay, there's no note for mom to say it's okay, then you change the protocol. Change that inclusion and exclusion criteria. Because if not, the FDA investigator is going to list that as observation because they did not meet protocol. Ensure the staff understand their responsibilities. A lot of turnover in the healthcare world out there right now, a lot of jobs being lost, gained, et cetera. Make sure everybody understands in the clinical trial world what's going on. For those of you, Joint Commission, kind of the same thing. Everybody needs to know how the ambulatory care system, the hospital, how it's working when Joint Commission comes in and audits you. FDA is no different. What's interesting, I've talked to a lot of people in the healthcare arena, this gentleman that talks at SOCRA. When Joint Commission inspects them down at Duke, they don't look at any of the clinical trial stuff. They don't look at the IRBs. You would think that's patient safety, that would be number one thing they're looking at. From what I understand, they're not. Now, you guys may correct me if I'm wrong on that, but still, my point is, make sure everybody understands their responsibilities. So if you are asked, you know what to say. Retain responsible clinical coordinators. Keep files organized at all times. Electronically, I think it's a little bit easier to keep electronic files now versus not. We paper kill ourselves. We kill too many trees because we even say keep it electronically. We still have hard copies. Just make sure you know where to grab the data, how to keep it organized. Keep it all studied together. People with the studies are pretty anal and keep everything all together, but sometimes things happen that gets lost. I mean, if there's a disaster, Katrina. I mean, how many clinical studies trial files were lost during there because of water damage? You just don't know. So have a backup system. Keep all correspondence from the sponsor, IRB monitors, study subjects. Any correspondence is important. There's no over-documentation in the clinical trial world. Letters, faxes, emails, phone contacts. If there's a phone log, keep a copy of the phone log with the study. Keep all test article accountability records. That's important. The agency doesn't look at it as much as they should. I'm a pharmacist. It's important. You want to make sure where the drugs are at. And if there's not a dedicated investigational pharmacy, how can you make sure that especially if it's an approved product, it's not getting mixed with the normal drugs? You have to make sure that's not happening. Have a good check and balance system. Shipping receipts and enrollment logs, dispensing logs. Know your IRB requirements. IRBs are either local or they're centralized. Centralized IRBs are becoming huge. Then a lot of the sponsors will only use a centralized IRB. There's big debate out there right now. Should we have a local IRB in addition to a central IRB? Do what your institution requires you. If you're a physician at an institution and you want to go through your local IRB in addition to the central one, do it because you're covering your butt. And it makes good clinical sense to do that. Because guess what? 4 eyes are better than 2, so the local IRB might find something that the central IRB is missing. Know the sponsor's adverse requirements. Know the protocol. Inclusion, exclusion criteria, study windows, study procedures. Know each study member's roles and responsibility. Have written procedures. This is not a regulatory requirement. It's good practice. Standard operating procedures for training procedures, job descriptions. Have a corrective action plan if there's a problem. If there's a deviation, what do you do? Why did that happen? What can we do to prevent it to happen with the next subject? Document, document, document. I can't stress that enough. Document what you do. Okay, so now we've gotten prepared, trying to make sure we're going to be okay. So inspectors are welcome. So what happens, we show our credentials, we ask questions, we review the procedures and the records, we ask more questions, we schedule a closeout meeting, we discuss findings with the most responsible person. That's in a nutshell. What happens is I walk in, introduce myself, issue the notice of inspection, we start usually looking at informed consent. We'll do 100% informed consent review, make sure that that's all been done. We're going to look at the IRB approvals. One thing with these IRB approvals, IRBs are varied, obviously more so than you realize. What's good, if you have an IRB approval on a protocol and an informed consent, have that approval letter, have what the date of the protocol, the version of the protocol, the date of the informed consent, the version of the informed consent. What's happening with these informed consents, some of these IRBs are only approving them a year at a time, so they stamp them with an expiration. Well, we as investigators know that unless that informed consent changed, that's going to stay the same. But make sure if the protocol was originally approved in 2014, so you have an informed consent that was good from 2014 to 2015, now it's 2016, you're enrolling a new subject, and that informed consent hasn't changed, make sure you have the new one that says expires in 2016, not the one that says expires in 2015. That's just good documentation practice. We're not going to ding you for that, but we're going to discuss it, say, make sure how do we really know this is the same informed consent? Because we're going to go line by line to make sure it is. We're going to ask questions, any deviations, any adverse events, how did this study go? Was there dropouts? Was there people that couldn't come in to study for timeframes? Did you go back to the sponsor and say the inclusion exclusion criteria didn't meet your needs? The time windows for dosing or the blood draws was not correct. We're going to ask questions. Ask questions daily, discuss at the end of each day with the most responsible person or the designated person, this is what we're finding, good or bad. We're going to be honest with you from day one. And probably actually asking during the review of the records. So they'll probably schedule a closeout meeting each afternoon. And then they'll actually close out at the end of the inspection with the CI, if there's a notice of inspection to be listed, issued, or just discussion with them. This will be decided up front. The investigators should not be in your firm more than 2 weeks. That's not a policy. That's good common sense. If they're finding problems and you think they're in there too long and disrupting things, let the agency know. We're not there to impede patient care. We're there to just review records and make sure the data submitted to the agency supports the indication. So have the most responsible person there at the start. The CI may not be available, we understand that, but he should have a designee in his place or her. Allow time for the opening meeting, provide space for us to work, provide access to all the files they need, and someone knows where the files are. This may be problematic because we know that the coordinators sometimes change, so the new coordinator may not know what the old stuff is, but they should ask at least, and you should know ahead of time what the study is, so they should be able to find it. Provide access to the person for copies if requested, be reachable during the day, and be available at the end of each day for a wrap-up. So what do? We go to the inspection site to recreate the trial, from the source records to the CRF to the data submitted by the agency. We're looking from day one, when you consented them, when you started the trial, the test article administration, everything followed the protocol. We're trying to recreate the study. Unless it's an ongoing study, then we're going to verify that you got patients coming in for that study, that you're doing what you need to do. Protocol adherence and safety reporting, those are huge. What type of subjects are recruited, enrolled, and randomized? Did the study blinded or unblinded staff, who had access to the treatment assignment, and in what situations. The study staff, pharmacist, the CRO, sponsor, or other third party. We do look at a fair amount of blinded studies. A lot of times these are closed, so they're usually unblinded at the end, but they may not be to the site. So that's questions we'll ask. Source documents. First pen to paper. Remember Alcoa. Accurate, legible, contemporaneous, original, and attributable. May be defined in the protocol. So we want to make sure it's real data. We don't want to find sticky notes in subject charts. We want to make sure that's recorded in a progress note. It's accurate information has been recorded and documented. FDA investigator will ask the general staff questions. The bulk of inspection will be the investigator looking at records. Photocopies may be requested or electronic, and all regulations the FDA inspect about copies records. All right. So we're going to review the authority and the administration of the studies. Who had the authority to conduct the study? We're going to look at the protocol. We're going to look at the IRB, was it centralized, local, the approval process. We're going to look at the subject records, the informed consent, the source documents, and the CRFs. We're going to look at other study records, the financial disclosure, any electronic records, test site controls, records, custody and retention, reports to the sponsor, monitoring. The other thing we're going to look at, a lot of these sponsors will provide the CIs with training before the study starts. We'll look at that. We'll document who attended the training, what kind of training did the sponsor provide. Was it correct information? Was it regulated information? A lot of times, I'm amazed when I go to sites that they don't even know the compliance program exists. So I always leave that with them so they know that they can do their own internal audit. Because the sponsor should, the monitors should be saying, this is what FDA is going to look at. They should be upfront with you as we are. Study files, the protocol, consent forms, investigator brochure, adverse event reporting, any advertising, any correspondence that goes out to the CI, the IRB, or the sponsor. We're going to look at the correspondence records. So we're going to schedule the closeout. The site may or may not receive an issue 43. Inspectional observations. It's not the devil giving you a bad report. All that Form 43 is a list of observations noted by that investigator at that point in time. Protocol violations were not followed. Correct informed consent was not used. There was no test article accountability. It's violations of the regulations. That's all it is. Nothing more may happen with it. It may happen with it. They're presented orally to you guys. You guys have to discuss issues with the investigator at the time of closeout. If you do get a list of observations, we highly encourage you to respond back to the agency within 15 days of how you corrected it, which you may have already done because the study may be closed, or how you plan to correct it in the future. That 15-day window is important. It's very valuable to you guys to make sure further regulatory action does not happen.
I have a question.
Yes.
This happened really early on, so maybe pre-FDA audit ago, at one of my institutions. So before I got there, so there was a FDA audit at my institution before, I became, and this is on an IRB audit. And then I came, and then we had, 5 years later, we had another IRB audit. And they did get some observations, so they did have a 483.
Okay.
But like 3 out of 5 were corrected, or they did a corrective plan. And then I remember just seeing it kind of crossed out, and I think it was crossed out by the FDA.
Crossed out on the 43 issued?
Yeah. Is that standard practice, or?
In the device world and the manufacturing world for devices, that is standard practice. In the normal, for every other commodity, the investigator, if you corrected it during the inspection, it most likely will not. If it was me, if you corrected it during the inspection, even though I observed it, I would not put it on the 43. I would make a note that it was corrected.
Okay.
It depends. That it's not. I want to say it's standard practice. It depends on the investigator and what their management's telling them to do.
Okay.
I'll be honest.
Because I didn't know if you reissued the 483 with the lesser
No,
amounts. You just
there's no reissue. The only time they would reissue it is if they needed to go back for someone. There might be extenuating circumstances where they might need to reissue it. With the device world, they'll cross it out and just line it out, and that stays on the initial 43. They don't issue a second 43.
Okay, that's what I added.
Yeah. So her question is, you should only ever get one 43. And she brings up a good point. If the investigator was there before, one thing they're going to ask, if you were listed list of observations or even the discussion items, we put what they call a voluntary correction section in our report. So we'll address anything that was discussed from the previous inspection, whether it was a violation or not, to see, have you corrected it, what's been done. It's kind of a recap of what you guys have done. Okay. So we're going to go over some definitions. A violation, this is not being in compliance with the regulation. Observation finding during inspection may be a violation pending FDA center review. Remember, these assignments come out of the centers. They don't come out of the field. The way the agency is set up, when we do manufacturing inspections and we find GMP deficiencies, the local compliance branches can issue further warning letters, untitled letters. They can do consent decrees. Further action can happen at the local level. With bioresearch monitoring, because these assignments come out of the centers, the center compliance does the final action, if any. The FDA investigator gets you a list of observations. We're noticing these violations. You violated the regulation. The protocol was not violated. Inclusion-exclusion criteria was not used correctly. No, the subjects were not properly consented. The IRB did not do their job. That's just observations of us at that point. Then it goes back to the assigning center, say it's Center for Drugs. They're going to look at that report and say, is this something that can be fixed? Is this something egregious? Did it cause subject harm? What's going on? They can determine at that point if they want to issue an untitled letter, a warning letter, consent decree, anything like that, further regulatory action. So the EIR, the Established Inspection Report that we write as investigators, is very important to that assigning center. We may not list an issue of observations. We just notice some bad documentation practices are happening. Example, a lot of people use Excel forms, a lot of electronic forms for tracking. One thing that we like to see for good documentation practice is that you put a header and a footer of when that form was created and what date it was used. Is it the same form going through the whole process? Just simple documentation issues. If there's whiteout, are people using whiteout? That's something that may happen. And then the clinical inspection summary goes into our system. So we submit, once we write that report, it's submitted to the assigning center for review. They post inspection letter to the IRB institution. And a copy of the copy of our report issues when the process is complete. So after the center classifies it, there's a process that we call FMD 145, which will give you a copy of your report. So I have a question for the lady that had the previous inspection. Did you get to see the previous report when you walked in? Did you see a copy of the previous report for that IRB?
Well, yeah, that's the one I was talking about that had
the 40. You saw okay, so you saw the line. So, but you actually did see the 43 and the inspection report itself too.
No, I never got the full inspection report on that old report.
Okay, so then you should be able to see that. If you don't have that, if you guys are coming into places or it's the second or third audit and you haven't gotten your inspection report from the last one, please let the agency know, let the local FDA office know, because you are entitled to have that. And we have a procedure called FMD 145. Once the center classifies it, it automatically is sent to you from the local district.
Do you get a report if no 483
Yes.
is issued too?
Yes, you should get a report whether 43 is issued or not. You should get a copy of our inspection report. If you are not getting that, let your local FDA office know. There's been a backlog, I'll be honest. And like I said, the assigning, and it may be the backlog, it may be the backlog from the center not classifying it. So until the local office says that center's classified it as OAI, BAI, or NAI, the local office doesn't know to send it out to you guys. So that's just a checkbox. So when you guys come up, you get a call, you're going to be inspected again, go, hey, I haven't got my last inspection report. You guys are entitled to that. So make sure. And it's good information. It's nice because what it does, the inspection report is based on the compliance program, so it breaks them by authority, protocol, inclusion, exclusion criteria, IRB approval, informed consent. So it's a good information to help you, as for many auditors, for internal audits to use. So please, if you're not getting them, let the local district know. If you go to fda.gov, and I don't know if we have an internet link, but I can show it at the end. You can click on fda.gov and click on locations. It'll show all the local offices across the country. Principal investigators should respond to a written the 43 observations within 15 days. The study site should take corrective action to make any deficiencies if possible, provide documentation of any corrective preventive actions. A lot of this may be already done because the study's completed, so we may, as an investigator, say, okay, you didn't properly consent this person last time, but they're here for another trial. How do we know that you're consenting them correctly this time? Excuse me. So we will ask the question to verify that you are correctly consenting the subject. Or if they're not making meeting assignments, are you dropping the subjects from the study? What are you doing to make sure that they can follow the protocol? We write the report, it's for the center. The form FDA inspection observation, these should be significant deviations from the regulations. When I talked about the informed consent changing in these studies, which changes a lot, we understand that with adverse events. The subject was initially consented with the original informed consent. That's all the law requires. Did they have the updated ones subsequent? As long as they were informed, we probably will discuss it, not put it on a 43 because they were consented properly by the law. And it's only the investigators' observations at that point in time. Anything else written in the report, the center can come back and say, no, we really wanted that informed consent signed each time. So that's their call. We're just as investigators, we're just following the regulations. So I talked about classifications. Here's our classifications. No action indicated, no objectionable conditions or practices. This is usually when no 483 is issued. However, it may be classified NAI if it's not deemed a patient safety issue, if we did find deviations. Voluntary action were indicated. There's some objectionable conditions. The protocol wasn't followed to the T. They missed them. Their window time frames are out of frame. The center's not prepared to take any action. Official action indicated serious objectionable conditions warranting action, advisory, administrative, or judicial. This is what you don't want. These are the warning letters that everybody sees about on the web. Everything is on the World Wide Web now. So you want to avoid OAI. I highly suggest if you get a list of observations, it's not probably going to be OAI, but please respond back with corrective actions within 15 days. Depending on the center, they may think it's egregious enough if you don't respond. I mean, we've been told by firms, oh, well, it's nice that we got a letter from FDA, but we thought it was like the IRS, we didn't need to respond. So if you get a letter from FDA asking for something, how are you going to fix something, please respond. OAI is usually repeated or deliberate failure to comply with regulations. There's been several investigators recently debarred for bad practices. You don't want to be in that situation. There's potentially an IRB that's going to be disqualified, which will be the first one in the country. That has not happened yet, but everything's out there on the radar. Sponsors have issues as well. OAI, 9 times out of 10 is falsification of data. That's the biggest thing. We have an Office of Criminal Investigations. If we think there's a problem with the CI, we will get them involved. A gentleman down in Southern California, unfortunately, has passed away, but admitted before he passed away that yes, he was not signing any documents. It was all the secretary. He was signing off on everything, whether it was lab records, whatever. He wasn't verifying anything. So we want to make sure that it's good. Give me some water, thank you. Electronic captured reported outcomes, procedures adequate to accomplish task. Thank you. So the post-inspectional process. The site should receive a copy of the inspection report after inspection is classified by the center. This may take up to 6 months, I'll be honest. But if you guys are not getting a report within 6 months, let your local FDA office, or you'll have the investigator's card who inspected you, shoot them an email and they can track it down for you. Because you guys are entitled to this, and it's a good training for the next study you do, the training staff, new training staff coming on, the CI to say, you know, what did we do wrong, what can we do better? The assigning center will send you a letter of follow-up as well. And like I said, if they're requesting any additional information, please respond to them. So possible actions that can happen besides the list of observations. An untitled letter is usually what happens. There's been some sort of, you know, deficiencies that happen quite enough that, you know, you guys need to be put on a warning that, you know, don't let this happen. Warning letters is what you don't want to happen. Warning letters now is very transparent on the agency for foods, drugs, devices, anything out there. You guys don't want to show up on a warning letter list. You guys are thinking about using a new CI, look and see if he's got a warning letter against him. Look at the IRBs. Do they have warning letters against him? There's notice of disqualifying NIDPO. But basically what this is, if there's a problem with that investigator, the problem with that IRB, problem with that sponsor, they are sent a letter, this letter, that gives them the opportunity to respond to say how we can correct what you're doing wrong. If they can tell the agency this is how we've corrected it, this is what we're doing, they most likely won't be disqualified or debarred. But they have to show this documentation. The rejection of the study, or there could be prosecution. There is in the regulation investigator disqualification. Repeated and deliberate failure to comply with the regulations. They do get an opportunity for a formal hearing, and it may result in them with an ineligibility to receive investigational drugs. There's a debarment list out there. Be familiar with that. You don't want to use the bad players out there. Here's the list for the warning letters, list for the debarment letters. Outcome of our studies, we're either going to accept or reject the study data. Product approval, complete or response to sponsor, letter of warning or enforcement action, results posted on clinical investigator sites, education of the study site. We want to make sure the data is correct. We want to make sure how we're taking patients is actually going to help the subjects. It's going to help provide a new indication. These are some numbers from last year. Amount of the clinical investigator inspections we did for fiscal year 2014 domestically, just in the continental US, was 785. Broken down by Center for Biologics at 109, Center for Drugs 472, Center for Devices 203, and Center for Foods, believe it or not, we did one inspection, one clinical trial inspection. This is the classification that came out. The majority of them were no action indicated. There might have been minor deviations, but there was no warning letters, no egregious outcomes. 38% were voluntary action corrected. They knew that they enrolled the patient incorrectly. They didn't have the right informed consent. They didn't have test order accountability. 5% were OAI. This is still a fair amount. That's very, I mean, there's still 5% of the clinical trials out there that we looked at, and we're not looking at that many. Because you go to clinicaltrials.gov, there's thousands of them listed there. And we looked at 785 domestically. But 5% of those 785 were bad. So what was bad about them? They failed to follow the investigational plan, protocol deviations, inadequate record keeping, inadequate accountability of investigational drug product, inadequate communication with the IRB, inadequate subject protection, failure to report AEs, informed consent issues. What is this one? Oh, the international. This is international. So we looked at 155 international inspections in last fiscal year. 22 were Center for Biologics, 112 for drugs, 17 for devices. They classified pretty much similar the same, but still 3% of those international ones were bad. Once again, protocol deviations, inadequate accountability, inadequate subject protection. That's huge. We're not protecting these subjects for these clinical trials. That's huge. We need to make sure there's not unanticipated deaths coming from what we're doing. So have procedures for what you do. Follow your procedures. Use your resources, including FDA.gov. Lots of information. Questions? Thank you.